U.S. Senator Tom Cotton. Thanks for being here.
Great to be on with you.
Wanted to start talking about Syria. You praised the Trump administration's decision to attack a Syrian air base. I wonder what you see as the threshold for future attacks. Is it just if Assad decides to use chemical weapons again, because there's been talk of responding to even barrel bomb attacks in the future?
Well, as Secretary of Defense Jim Mattis said, those attacks with chemical weapons were ill-advised, and I suspect Bashar al-Assad now regrets it. But he knows, as does the rest of the world know, that President Trump doesn't share President Obama's reluctance to use force. I view the attacks last week as a targeted and proportionate retaliatory strike for the use of a chemical weapon that's banned under the Chemical Weapons Convention, to which Syria signed onto in 2013. So it's as much about the use of weapons of mass destruction, especially in a battlefield where we have hundreds of Americans present, as anything about broader Syria policy. But I think President Trump went a long way to restoring our credibility, again, not just in Syria, but with friends and foes alike around the world.
Your party have talked about providing more weapons to Syrian opposition groups, imposing a no-fly zone, conducting further airstrikes to pressure Russia and Assad to end the civil war. Are you in favor of any of those options?
Syria is a very thorny problem now. It would have been much better had President Obama acted 6 years ago to get ahead of events rather than let events stay in the saddle. But as Secretary of State Rex Tillerson has said, the rule of the Assad family is coming to an end, one way or another in the long run. That doesn't mean that we have to sit passively by, nor does it mean that we have to have a ground invasion and occupation of the kind that we've seen in Iraq and Afghanistan. But it does mean that when our allies are involved in Syria, when our interests are at stake there, as we see pressure from migrant flows and we see the threat of the Islamic State, we need to take the lead of a broad worldwide coalition in the fight against the Islamic State to protect our interest in Syria. And we can do more, and we are doing more already.
What about on the idea of a no-fly zone? Because I think that would be kind of a pretty big decision in escalation.
That's much harder to accomplish now than it would have been 4 or 6 years ago with the presence of Russian aircraft and Russian air defense systems. I know the President and his national security team is working through a careful, deliberate process to determine a broader Syria policy. I'll wait until they reach the conclusions of that policy, but I think that the goals of the policy are pretty clear. We have to defeat the Islamic State. We have to reach some kind of political, stable outcome in Syria, and we have to stand by our allies throughout the broader Middle East.
How concerned are you with an accidental confrontation with Russia that could spiral out of control?
Well, maybe from their standpoint they should bolster their military presence in Syria, since they were powerless to stop the United States last week. The deconfliction hotline that we discussed is just one way that our two militaries can coordinate what's happening in Syria, because we don't want to have any kind of inadvertent conflict between Russian forces or American forces. Both countries have troops on the ground in Syria right now, but much of what Russia has done since those attacks has been PR stunts to try to save face for the fact that they were powerless to protect their own client in Syria.
You don't seem very concerned that that's a likely or something.
It's always a concern whenever Russia and the United States are present in the same area of operations. It's a concern around the world because of Russia's aggressive techniques of flying their aircraft close to our ships and our planes, whether it's in Europe or whether it's in East Asia or the Middle East. I suspect, though, that after last week, Russia, like most of our foes around the world, will be a little more hesitant to challenge the United States in that way.
You talked about coming to some kind of solution because Russia is so invested in that country now with an air base and a naval base. What possible compromise solution that would appease the Russians to a certain extent and end the civil war? I mean, it seems like a quagmire.
Well, as Secretary of State Tillerson said when he was in Moscow this past week, Vladimir Putin needs to ask himself if he's going to continue to support a global pariah, the Bashar al-Assad regime, or whether he's going to come to the table with the other countries with large stakes on the outcome in Syria, the United States, Turkey, the Arab countries, and so forth, and make some kind of reasonable accommodation to everyone's interest. Only he can bring pressure to bear on the Assad family in a way that's necessary to reach that conclusion, but it's necessary for the United States to be a part of those deliberations. And for too long we haven't been, because we simply haven't been invested in that outcome through the credible threat of force and the use of force if necessary.
Let's talk about North Korea. It strikes me that we have somewhat of a similar circumstance here with China in this case, propping up an outlaw regime. What's the solution there where you can appease the Chinese in some way, allow them to maintain what they see as a buffer against South Koreans, but also, you know, maybe toning down the rhetoric there and the possibility for some kind of a deadly confrontation?
Well, North Korea may be an even more threatening situation to the United States because they have nuclear weapons and they have improving ballistic missiles. If they marry those two together and are able to put a workable nuclear warhead on a missile, they can threaten not only our troops and citizens that we have living in places like Korea and Japan and Guam and the Pacific Ocean, but the continental United States. Before that happens, the United States is going to have to act. Donald Trump has made it perfectly clear that after 25 years of failure on our North Korea policy, there's no more road to kick the can down. And I know that he's made that clear to Chinese President Xi Jinping as well. I thought it was very telling that these strikes in Syria occurred literally in the middle of the dinner between President Trump and President Xi. China is the one country that can bring the most pressure to bear on North Korea. 90% of all North Korean economic activity is oriented toward China. So I think it's an important message that the president sent to China last week and that he continues to send in conversations just this past week as well, which is that China is going to help the United States solve the problem of North Korea.
You have another town hall planned for Monday here in Little Rock. There's been some criticism that it's at 1:30 in the afternoon. Why not have it later in the day when working people could attend?
Yeah, French Hill and I decided that we want to do a town hall together. I'd done one with Rick Crawford in Heber Springs a few weeks ago, and it worked very well because we were able to complement each other. The view from the House and the Senate, the view from different committees and backgrounds and expertises. So it was really just a matter of coordinating the time French and I could both be in Little Rock. I'll be in Little Rock again in a couple days after that. I'll be speaking with Skip Rutherford at the Clinton School, kind of giving a perspective on the first 100 days of the Trump administration. So multiple opportunities to see me in Central Arkansas during this Easter holiday week.
Do you enjoy that kind of atmosphere, the raucous people shouting and yelling? And
yeah, you know, we have a lot of different ways we reach Arkansans, you know, whether it's at a big town hall with a lot of folks coming or a round table with mayors or tours of manufacturing facilities or academic centers, private one-on-one meetings, all of which I've done just in the past week. So we try to have multiple opportunities for Arkansans to meet me in any different forum. We try to do things like telephone town halls, so folks who can't get out of the house, either because maybe they're elderly and shut in or because they're parents with young children, can have a chance to hear from me as well. So in every way possible, we try to reach out to Arkansans so we can hear from them and they can hear from me.
All right, we'll have to leave it at that. U.S. Senator Tom Cotton, thanks so much for coming on the show.
Thanks, Drew, and congratulations to you for your big move to Washington. We're going to miss you in Arkansas, and you're getting the worst end of the stick by moving to Washington full time.
Well,
but we appreciate all the time you spend here.
I'll be seeing you, and I appreciate your words.